everybody, and welcome to another episode of Eating at a Meeting. I am up in Greenville, North Carolina today, working for a client. So I'm taking some time away to come and bring you this wonderful education session on how to eat across Europe. And ironically, the company that Kenny Dunn founded is called Eating Europe. So I am so excited to talk to him. He got his start in international development and urban agriculture and went to Europe on a trip and decided that he wanted to stay there and start eating across the country, and started a company to help all of us do that the same. That is very generic and wildly different introduction to you, Kenny, but welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Tracy. Very happy to be here.
So tell us, I said you went from working in food security and sustainable agriculture at the UN to building one of Europe's leading food tour companies. How does that, tell us about how you got started in that urban agriculture aspect of it, and then to what you're doing now? Because it was a lot more than just saying, hey, I went to a restaurant, now I want to start a food tour.
Right. A little bit. So kind of really the seed was planted. So for a few years, I was backpacking all around Asia and then Latin America. And that was what kind of really opened my eyes up to two things that ultimately kind of helped seed Eating Europe. So one was how much food was part of my travels. I loved going to markets, especially in countries throughout Asia and Latin America, and really anywhere, Europe as well. The market is such a great place to discover what people eat, how people eat, to have interactions with individuals. If you go to a restaurant, you're often talking to, maybe your server. But when you go to a market, the person who's selling those goods is right there. And I mean, sometimes there's a language barrier, oftentimes, but you can engage with them however you can. And so it's just a great kind of gateway into the local cuisine, and that's part of the local culture. And so as I was traveling around all these countries, that was something I did everywhere, in the smallest of little villages to big cities, et cetera. Go to markets, go to street stalls, et cetera. And that's also where I first began working on kind of sustainable agriculture projects. Initially in one of the most recent countries. At the time, it was the newest country in the world. Now I don't think it is anymore. East Timor, which sits on the very eastern side of Timor Island, which is, so half of it is Indonesia, half of it in 2000, I think, 2000 or so, became a country, East Timor. So I was working on a agriculture project there. And then when I went over to South America, and specifically Colombia, I was working on an urban agriculture project in a city called Manizales, going into different neighborhoods and really working with this team on telling people how they can grow their own food within the city, as part of kind of meeting the challenges around food security. And ultimately, that led to me going back to grad school, studying international development. And that brought me to Rome, where I was working at the UN at the World Food Program. So that was kind of that part. And when that ended, that seed that was planted traveling around and really understanding and appreciating how much food is part of understanding a culture and a local cuisine, I then kind of was trying to figure out what to do next, and thought about how meaningful that was for me, and decided to start what at the time was the first food tour company in Rome, taking people around my neighborhood, this neighborhood called Testaccio, which has a very much kind of a blue collar kind of history, and took people, of course, to the market there, which was one of my favorite markets, still is, in Rome, and introduced them to all these wonderful people and got them to hear about their food, their stories, and taste the various things that they made and sold. And that was the very beginning. So that was
Wow.
kind of the line to get to eating Europe.
Well, and I mean, your work in doing urban development and saying, "Hey, this is how you can grow food in your towns and whatever," that really plays to the culture of all of these cities that you're now showing off with the food culture. It gave you an
Yeah,
inside.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, again, I think so much when you go to a market, whether it's in Europe or in, anywhere,
Mhm.
Latin America, Africa, Asia, or in the US, I think it really what are people eating?
Mhm.
I was just in actually in Colombia and Panama last week, and it was amazing to see the array of fruits and vegetables, some of which I knew about, I've tried, and other things
Mhm.
like, whoa, what's that? And any of those what's that moments when
Mhm.
you're traveling, especially around food, I think are such opportunities to learn and exciting, What's that? And then if you're getting a chance to try it, you might love it, you might not, but it's memorable either way.
Right. Yeah, and we take for granted when we go into the grocery store and we see like here's bananas and here's peaches and depending on where you are, I mean bananas are not local to anyone in the United States, right? But thinking through like even actually I was sending a chef or a caterer to Asian market yesterday to buy some jackfruit because jackfruit for to make some vegetarian vegan barbecue because he's serving
Yeah.
barbecue and he had some vegetarians and I'm like use this instead. But he's like, what's that? Right. So, and it was in a can. Unfortunately, we couldn't find it fresh here where we are, but, um, it is,
Well,
I
that's
like
a
that.
really
Like, what's
heavy
that?
thing to carry home. I mean, those jackfruits are like,
They're
I don't know.
huge.
Yeah, maybe 3 footballs or so. I
Right.
mean, they're they're enormous. But
Well, and he
yeah,
only
I
has
mean,
three vegan or vegetarians to feed. So that probably would have been way too much
too
jackfruit
much anyway. Yeah.
anyway.
That could feed like 20 vegan,
Right.
yeah, 20 people.
But I like that thing, like, what's that? And it does remind me going to the market in Vietnam and seeing one of the vendors cooking a dog. And it was like, what's that? Right. But I did not choose to try that one. But,
Yeah.
um,
That's not the answer you were hoping to get,
right.
but
Yes,
it was memorable. I
it
mean,
was. Yep.
you're still telling that story now. So
Yeah. 16 years later, for sure.
yeah,
Um, So one of the things that you've said in articles that I've read about you is that what you really do isn't taking people around to taste dishes. It's giving them access to a culture, which you've alluded to a little bit. Can you unpack that a little bit more? And what does a great guide, because you're not the guide, you're in, what did we say before we started? 23 cities? Is that right?
that's right. This is, yeah.
What does a great guide in those 23 cities provide that a guest couldn't get, just walking through town and trying to find a restaurant?
Right. Yeah, I mean, um, first of all, I think to me, when you travel, there's really two aspects to it for most people. One is, of course, you got to see the highlights, and I live in Rome, so if you're a first-time visitor, absolutely you must go to the Colosseum, one of the seven
Mhm.
wonders of the world. You're going to go to the Vatican, the Pantheon, all of these places that, for many people are like bucket list
Mhm.
destinations. But the other side of it is to try and, get a sense for how people live in that city, in that country, et cetera, like kind of a taste of local life, if you will. And one of the best and most accessible ways to do that is through food, because all of us eat, all of us have kind of our own ways of, eating and our local food culture. And so
Mhm.
you can access it, you can relate to it. And plus it's one of the most enjoyable things to do in general in life, but especially when you travel. And so our tours are really meant to try and help facilitate that. I mean, if you're just moving around on your own, you gave the example, you just make a reservation at a restaurant or just pop into one. Yeah, you might have a very friendly server who kind of helps provide more information than just what the daily specials are. But mostly you're just going to be looking and kind of wondering, as I said before, what's that? Or why are
Mhm.
people eating that? Or what are people doing over there? And so now you have a local, who lives and is often from that city, um, in a very small group setting, 6, 8, 10 people, who can really translate what's going on around you. Like, and now we're going to go have soupli. This is in Rome. It's a fried risotto ball stuffed with mozzarella, and not just say what it is and how it's made, which,
Mhm.
is certainly interesting, but also, how it fits within the kind of the local cuisine and food
Mhm.
culture. So you can see this place is packed right now, this little hole in the wall. Why? People come here, kind of, this is one of the most popular, if not the most popular street foods. This is a snack that people have throughout the day. They'll pop into this place, order a soupli, kind of maybe in between meals or on the way to a meeting, and look at what that guy's eating over there. That's called pizza al taglio. It's a little different than the sit down pizza. And our my favorite place to try that is over there. And all of that kind of helps create kind of a picture
Mhm.
of yeah, kind of how people eat and live. And it's not always, for sure, about just food. That's also an opportunity for you to ask your guide, and for your guide to oftentimes provide this information even if you don't ask, about just little things like, when do people wake up in the morning? In Spain,
Right.
tours in Spain, people are blown away that you have dinner at 10 p.m. It's like, how is that? So what time do you go to sleep? And what time does your next day start? And these are questions that you naturally have, but you don't always have someone, unless you have a friend in the city, who you can kind of ask those questions to. What's it cost to live in Madrid? A one bedroom is this, or do most people live in the city or outside the city? Or, is it true about siesta, where you go home for, 2 hours, and do you actually take a nap? Or, all of these things that you might have as curiosities. And especially now that people don't travel with guidebooks, like,
Mhm.
so much, like Lonely Planet or Rick Steves, that those were always great sources for some of that more general culture information. So the tour ends up being like, here's some of the iconic dishes. This is how it's made. This is how we consume them. But also, here's also some things just about what it's like to live here in Rome or Madrid or Prague or wherever you might be joining one of our tours.
Um, and I love that because, and do you do any, because I know there was a trend of going and eating in people's homes. Is that part of any of those, or is it just more of you're utilizing restaurants?
Yeah, we used to have a tour in Naples where we did go into someone's home.
Mhm.
Unfortunately, we're not able to do that anymore. But by and large, or currently, no, we don't do any of that. And by and large, that was never a big focus. I mean, there are still
Okay.
companies that do that, and that is a great
Mhm.
experience. Um, but I wouldn't say it's just restaurants either. I mean, it's really a mix. And my favorite tours of ours really do offer kind of a nice diversity of food stops. So for sure,
Okay.
restaurants, the bakery, a market stall, a pastry shop, a wine bar. I mean, your local deli, because all of them are a different kind of window into another aspect of that food culture. So when you go to the deli, and a deli in Rome is very different than a deli in Prague, which is different than a deli in Amsterdam, in part because, of course, what they sell is different. But sometimes, like in Rome, it's a place where you go where a lot of people, especially workers, are going to get a sandwich made.
Right.
In in Amsterdam, that's not so much the case. They have more like prepared foods. And so it's just great to have your food tour guide kind of translate that and narrate kind of what's happening there. Like, all right, over there, those guys are all working in the area. They're coming in to get their panino. Um, and then you have these, people are doing their daily shopping. You're not just coming here for your cured meats, but they also have, you know, like homemade sausage and
Yeah.
cheeses, other things. And so all of that is kind of interesting because it's, tells a bit about the culture and is probably different than what you have in Greensville, North Carolina, or
Hmm.
Chicago, or wherever you might be visiting us from,
Right. Well, and that's so true because and it's again going back to that statement that you said, what's that? I mean, it really does help you like investigate or explore a city more so when you're looking at the different aspects because also all those different types of places that you just mentioned, we all eat those in different aspects of our daily lives as well. Like for breakfast, we're going to have a pastry and fruit or whatever, whatever eggs and things. So it is, I love the fact that you've got the different aspects of the different types of food that are served, not just like, hey, here's pizza in Italy versus pizza in the US, right? It's showing a little bit more of that. The oh, I had a question that popped into my head and now it's gone. So let's
It'll
just
come
go back
back.
to that a little bit. I mean, you're picking your and I don't know if you've been to Vegas and been on the lip smack and foodie tours there.
I
Donald
have
Gr
not. I know of the company and I
yeah,
may have met the owner, but I've never
yeah.
had the pleasure to hear
So
that.
he does a lot of research on the and it's going to different restaurants in parts of town. It's fun as well. But I mean, you're in what did we say? 11 countries? Is that in 23 or 11 countries in 23 cities is what I think we figured out before
Mm.
we came online. But you have to have a deep local knowledge and real research on that. And how are you? So, kind of a two-part question. What's that groundwork that your tour guides are doing? And how are they finding those spots that want to participate in your tour? Because it might not, they're like, oh no, I don't have time for that, right? Like, how do you
Mm.
find those partners?
Yeah, great question. One thing just to pick up on the Vegas comparison, and then I'll jump into
Mhm.
the answer what you were asking about is I mean I think what's unique about tours and food tours in Europe or Asia or Latin America vis-a-vis those in the US is you're also learning about kind of the local cuisine,
Mhm.
I mean not to say that Vegas or any city. I mean, some cities like in New Orleans
Mhm.
or in the South or, really have kind of their own local cuisine, let's say. But a lot of times it's just showcasing, like in Vegas, just some great spots.
Right. Mhm.
But it's not so much this is how we eat in Las Vegas. But in the case of Europe and those other regions in the world, that's part of it too, as I was describing earlier, is, like what is it that people, how do people eat in Italy? How
Right.
do, or specifically in southern Italy, like in Rome, because it's so different regionally. And that's also interesting too, because you might be traveling throughout the country. So this is how we
Mhm.
eat down here, but next week you're going to be in Milan and you're not going to find this or this or this. You're going to find these other things. Now, in terms of how we find the local spots and connect with restaurant and food shop owners who want to partner with us and work with us because we very much look at them as our partners. I mean, it's
Mhm.
together, collectively and collaboratively that we bring these experiences to life. We always have in every one of our 23 cities, we have a local manager. So they're the ones who have the knowledge. It's their city. We're giving them kind of a bit of a playbook and of what makes an Eating Europe tour,
Mhm.
and what are we looking for and what kind of experience are we really trying to deliver. But they're the ones who are then bringing it to life based on their own knowledge and kind of their own research, if you will. And then they're going out and speaking to different places. And sometimes, as you kind of inferred, like a place might say, sorry, this sounds great, but we're already packed,
Right.
or we're just not interested, or they may have had a bad experience in the past with this kind of with food tours. Um, and that's okay. I mean, because we want to work. I mean, so much, I think, of what makes our tours work is that we have these restaurant partners who really want to kind of collaborate with us. And that
Mhm.
really comes through. So when you go into one of these shops and they're like, Buongiorno or Buenos dias, or
Mhm.
really welcoming, that's a completely different experience than if they don't even acknowledge that you're there or clearly look
Right.
like you're more of a nuisance than, really being welcomed. And so, we want to find people who are very much on board. And then we want to hear about their story. A big part about our tours is saying, okay, here we are at this shop. It's a third generation deli. This is
Nice.
Piero. He took it over for his dad. It was his grandfather who started it back in 1937. And that's his son, the fourth generation, Federico, and really kind of tell their story as well.
Mm-hmm.
And these were the changes that Piero made. He said when he took it over, he wanted to do this. And meanwhile, Federico is now pushing him to do more of this. And all of that helps to kind of color in the experience and bring it to life and make it more memorable, because it wasn't just a great porchetta sandwich. It was also, you got to hear about, their story, maybe their struggle, or how they innovated on something that you can find all over the city. And all of that, I think, really helps bring it to life.
No, that's awesome because you do want to hear those generational stories because it adds so much more. And not that a brand new restaurant's not going to bring that, you could be incorporating their grandmother's recipes or whatever, but something that has stayed so long, like in Rome and the Colosseum, like that's kind of ties all of that to that. Um, and adds more
And those are the
personality.
businesses we want to support. Yeah.
Right.
I mean,
Hmm.
because they're the ones who are really, these small businesses, especially the multi-generational ones, but also kind of new ones, like you said, that are innovating, but that are trying to really preserve the local cuisine and some of these local dishes, um, because, it is a globalized world. And
Hmm.
while it's great that in any city you can go and have your avocado toast, when you're traveling, I think you really want to have those local items. And so you need to make sure that these places that have been doing them and doing them
Hmm.
kind of for years are continuing to be successful and have a chance to be successful. And I think, our tours are one small way that we're trying to support and showcase these businesses so that these traditions can endure and
Right.
continue.
Well, and I interviewed an anthropologist years ago, a couple of years ago, and she was interviewing the kid because so much knowledge is not being transferred from grandmother to granddaughter or grandson anymore, in the kitchen, right? And so I'm glad that what you're doing is helping, you know, keep that tradition alive because so much is being lost by not spending as much time, at those family meals and learning how to cook like your grandmother did or your great grandmother did and the recipes, right? Or the recipes are just in my head or can we write them down? And so I like the fact that you do those tours, um, or bring that aspect to the tours. Going back a little bit to your graduate work in international development and, sustainable and urban agriculture, 2 weeks ago, I chatted with an economist from NC State, about the price of food and, the impact of global events have on food. Have you seen how is that impacting any of these partners that you have in the cities? Are they feeling that at all, or are they really utilizing what's closest to them to bring those dishes alive?
Yeah, I mean, I think for sure there's been some inflationary
Mm-hmm.
pressure, and I
Mm-hmm.
think being felt certainly in the US, which well documented, but also in Europe, and that are making everything more expensive. So yeah, without a doubt, there is that. I mean, I think, or what, I'm not an economist, but from what I've read and heard, I mean, some of the real shocks of some of these events, I think, are still haven't hit yet,
Right.
and we're going to see them a little bit down the road, unfortunately. And then the other thing is, in the cities we operate in Europe, they're not as vulnerable to them as if we were operating, more in the global South, in Africa, in Latin America, in some, poorer countries, especially in more rural areas
Mhm.
where, and this is kind of speaking more from a international development point of view, and um, those places are most vulnerable. And with the cost of diesel
Right.
and fertilizers and everything else going up so dramatically over the last 6 months, yeah, I think those places are really at great risk, and really dealing with some challenges
Right.
in a way where in the cities, in these kind of wealthier European cities vis-a-vis those in the South, it's not the same. But
Right.
of course, the cost, the cost of goods has gone up for everyone. I
Right.
mean,
Yeah.
we're seeing that.
Exactly. Okay. On a much lighter note, more, kind of going across the different cities. I mean, and you mentioned 6, 8, 10. You keep them small. I mean, one, I'm going to say a lot of the restaurants in Italy, across Europe, are smaller than the size of some restaurants in the United States. So that intimacy, but tying that to the title of this podcast episode, why are shared? I mean, those shared meals, are they more impactful on a smaller scale? Keeping it in that intimacy and authenticity size.
Yeah, I think definitely. I mean, we do have a lot of our tours will go up to 12,
Okay.
but that'll be the capacity where the
Okay.
average is more like 6 to 8. Um, but 100%. I mean, I think there's two aspects to this. So one is I think you can do a tour privately or a small group tour. I think a small group tour is so much more interesting because part of the experience, which I haven't touched on yet, is getting to share it
Mhm.
with the other people in the group that oftentimes are from all over the world, if not all over the US. And there's just something nice about kind of breaking bread and having an experience like this with strangers who
Mhm.
ultimately, over the 3 or 4 hours, you end up connecting with about different things. And it just makes it more meaningful. At the end of every tour, just to give you an example, we ask people, what was your favorite part? And so often we hear, my favorite thing to eat was the apple pie, but one of my favorite things was meeting all of you because there's just something
Mhm.
really special about sharing food with new people and finding a sense of connection. Um, and that can only happen, yeah, in kind of a smaller group setting.
Mhm.
If it was 20 people, yeah, you might get to talk to the person sitting next to you. But if it's 6 or 8 people, or even 12, you can have a real conversation kind of around the table.
Mhm.
And then there's all the connection that happens in between spots where it's like, oh, you said you're from North Carolina, my
Right.
daughter was studying down there, really, da da da. Where else are you going? Oh, you have to try this. And then you're sharing travel tips. And yeah, it's just, and as a guide, and for the first couple of years, I guided the majority of our tours, so I know that aspect to it as well. Um, to see those connections happen in real time is a really special thing, and at the end, for people to sometimes say, "What are you guys doing now? Do you want to all go out for a drink?" And
Mhm.
that happens more often than you would think, and that's just so nice to see, you know?
Especially in the current state of society, right? I mean, the
Yeah.
fact that everybody that's on those tours are willing to learn that culture, willing to sit down and have and break bread with somebody from, you know, 10,000 miles away from where they live. Um, do you have to do you, that connection is kind of very natural, right? Or do your guides have training in kind of really designing that connection, or is it just very like authentically happening?
Yeah, I mean, for sure, I think it's authentically happening, but we do try and enable it by, making sure all of our tours have sit down stops. I mean, some
Mhm.
food tours in general are more kind of grab and go.
Mhm.
Uh, and those can be great, but I think they don't offer the same opportunity to connect with people if you're sitting down for 40 minutes somewhere,
Mhm.
usually having some wine, which always helps. And so we try and kind of facilitate that. We have some ice breaking games as well, which also helps, when everyone knows where everyone else is from, that can then lead to, oh, you guys are from Denmark. We were there last summer. And
Right.
then that might facilitate a conversation where if you didn't have everyone present themselves and introduce themselves, that same that same exchange may not have happened. So it's a bit of both. I mean, it's authentic, but we try and kind of create an environment where it's more likely to happen or more easily happen, let's say.
Right. And I am that person that will say, "Oh," and people get annoyed by me because I do love talking to strangers and I love asking them questions or finding a connection. So, "Oh, I went there for 5 minutes or whatever," right? And and you end up learning so much more about those people in that country as wherever you are. I want to turn the tide a little bit because I love this project that you did that this year 2026 marked your 15th anniversary, right?
That's right.
Congratulations.
Thank you very much.
But what you did to celebrate, I think ties so much back to exactly what you started with the, your work at the UN is that you decided to fund 15,000 meals for World Central Kitchen. Kudos, that's fantastic. How did that come about? And then at the same time, how do you think about a culinary business's responsibility to the broader food system? I mean, there's so many people here, and I'm just going to throw this out there. There's so much food that's wasted globally, right? You know, on a large scale, but how do you tie that into what you're doing and what is the responsibility of that? Was like five questions in one, Kenny. I'm so sorry.
It's actually six, Tracy, but
Okay.
I'll try my best to put it all. Um, so, all right, first, thank you. Yeah, 15
That's
years. It's a
awesome.
huge milestone.
Hmm.
The exact day was July 2nd when I led the very first tour in Rome. Um, and, yeah, in terms of the partnership with World Central Kitchen, I mean, being 15 years, I definitely feel a tremendous sense of gratitude on so many levels to all the people who I work with currently, who I have worked with, who have helped kind of propel this company forward and upwards, and all of our customers over the years who have supported us. And so when you feel that gratitude, you really want to give back. And so it wasn't too hard for me to think of what organization would be a great one to give back to, because World Central Kitchen, I've admired them for a very long time. I mean, they do such great work going into, I mean, right now they're in Venezuela after the earthquake. Um, any kind of area that has been hit, whether it's a natural disaster or caused by something else, and they're there preparing kind of freshly made meals,
Hmm.
which is a little different than kind of the model, or a lot different at the World Food Program where I work. Both are incredibly important, but I love that they're there. They're working with local chefs and local people to prepare, hot, freshly made meals. And in these areas, people desperately need them, and really activating the community. So I've admired Jose Andres and this organization that he's built. And it's just been, yeah, it's been really gratifying to know that we could give back. This month, we should hit that goal. I think at the end of last month, we're at 13,000 something.
And
And
how are you funding those 15,000 meals?
So for every booking,
Hmm.
we give the equivalent of one meal. So we
Okay,
buy one meal, which then,
that's awesome.
get carried out by WCK. And then to the other aspect of your question, yeah, I mean, obviously food waste is huge and it's something that we think about. I mean, I guess a lot of food tour operators probably wrestle with that because on one hand, you want to give guests an experience where they feel like they got their money's worth, that they
Hmm.
didn't leave hungry, and that they get to try different things, and some of those things they may or may not like or may
Hmm.
um so there's some tension between wanting to deliver on all those things and at the same time not create more food waste than there
Hmm.
already is. So
Right.
it is something that we talk about and try and kind of do our best to really thread the needle there. And then in terms of kind of being part of creating more sustainable as a culinary tour business, creating more sustainable, imprint. I think, yeah, a lot of companies like ours do support kind of local, small, family-owned businesses.
Hmm.
So I think anyone who's doing that, and a lot of food tour companies do that, I think are contributing positively in that way for all the reasons we discussed a little earlier. Um, and then, yeah, education to guests and kind of, talking about the local food system to our guests and, maybe really kind of promoting the kind of places that we think are part of promoting the local cuisine and preserving those local traditions, not
Hmm.
just the ones we visit on the tour, but others, I think helps as well. And then, yeah, if you have the opportunity, like we are doing this year, to give back.
Hmm.
There's also some local, I mean, like in Rome, there's the non-Catholic cemetery. It's this beautiful, beautiful place. It's kind of part cemetery, which sounds a bit, yeah, a bit odd to do on a
Right.
food tour. But you go in there, I mean, they've got hundreds of different varieties of trees. It's also where Rome's only pyramid is that, is over 2,000 years old. And so we've been a friend of them and helped them support a huge project for preserving the trees because we've been visiting there on one of our tours, the original tour, the Taste of Testaccio, since the beginning. So if there are opportunities to also kind of support things at a more local level, not
Hmm.
global one like what we're doing with World Central Kitchen, we try and do that too. Um, yeah, and then yeah, I think supporting local businesses, locals who are guides, and
Hmm.
any other ways you can contribute to kind of the local economy as well, I think are all positive.
Yeah, definitely. And because it's the only way our cities are going to survive, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so because I also talk about food allergies and dietary restrictions on the show. Safety is very, very important, and Europe has a much stricter or in practice a lot longer than ours, 14 years, labeling of allergens. When you're working with a dozen of all these small independent kitchens across languages and countries, how do you ensure that me, who's gluten free, is going to have the same experience as everyone else? And are they all, I mean, I'm sure you're doing your due diligence on that, but how do I know, like, if I'm coming to Europe, that I can actually participate in one of these events?
Mhm. Yeah, so there's a few layers to that. I
Hmm.
mean, one is that if you have certain dietary restrictions, whether it's an allergy or just, you're vegetarian by choice or vegan, um, that everyone has an unforgettable experience. Now, if you're gluten free, you're not going to have the same experience as someone who does eat gluten, but we're going to do everything we can to make your experience just as memorable. But if someone's having pasta, I mean, maybe you'd be having gluten-free pasta or risotto. So I wouldn't say it's the same experience because it's, literally not the same experience, but that both are like, wow, that was a great experience. And my partner here who does eat gluten also had a great experience. Then food allergies is something else, and that's a real safety question. And you're absolutely right. And it's been interesting being in this, having this business for 15 years to see how much more that's become, a real, let's say, challenge, a real important issue. And so we ask every guest if they have any dietary restrictions. Are any of them life-threatening? If they are life-threatening, they must bring, whether it's an EpiPen or whatever other medication
Right.
they need to have on them in order to participate. And unfortunately, sometimes this happens more than you would think. We actually have to turn people away because they have a life-threatening allergy, but they don't have, their EpiPen or whatever necessary medication. And it's a big risk, and we don't want anyone to have any kind of health related
Mm-hmm.
issues or emergencies on tour with us. Then the other thing is, the other part of that chain is notifying, well, first off, the guide who's
Mm-hmm.
leading that. So they have a full manifest of everyone, what their dietary
Mm-hmm.
restrictions or food allergies are. We provide that same information to every one of our food partners or vendors, as we
Mm-hmm.
call them. Say, okay, this group has 8 people. These two have a nut allergy. We've already worked out with all of our vendors, all of our partners, what those substitutions are.
Mm-hmm.
And so, when we have someone who doesn't eat, has a food allergy to nuts, this is what we give them, it's vacuum sealed, pecorino cheese, that there's no chance of any cross contamination. Because that's the other real issue and the
Mm-hmm.
real fear is around cross
Right.
contamination. You mentioned earlier that restaurants are much smaller in Europe.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, so are the kitchens.
Right.
And so, it's not in the US, sometimes they have the luxury of having big kitchens where they can really kind of separate different things and really address cross contamination in a different way than maybe a small trattoria in Italy would have. So those are, that's what we're doing. We recently just introduced waivers, which is just another way to
Mm-hmm.
make people aware that, they're having to sign. I'm aware of, these are my allergies, and I'm aware that there's cross contamination, just so everyone knows right out of the get-go that this is kind of what you're signing up for. And these are, um, some of the things to consider to decide if this is right for you. I mean,
Right.
if you do have a very severe food allergy, then we're the first to say here are the kind of risks. This is
Right.
what we're going to do about it. But this might not be the right fit for you. And we don't want you to have a bad
Right.
experience. And we certainly don't want to put you in harm's way and on one of our
Well, and I
tours.
wonder too if that's an opportunity for a customized tour, versus going on one of the generic tours. Just as a thought for
Yeah,
those
I
people.
mean, we do offer
Mhm.
all tours private.
Mhm.
I mean, some of the same underlying
Right.
risks
Yeah.
are still there around
Right.
cross contamination. I mean, there's a lot we can really customize, as I said. If you let us know what your food allergies or dietary restrictions are, and we're going to kind of customize it for you. Um, in some cases, maybe a private tour might allow us to even customize further because we can really change the route. But usually it's just around kind of that cross
Right.
contamination and just
Yeah.
awareness so we can have an alternative for you.
Right. Nope. No, that makes sense. And I appreciate what you do. And I want to introduce you to another one of my podcast guests, Zach Marks, um, off the air. Um, that might be a fun collaboration in the UK. I'll tell you more about that later. But Kit Medical. Um, so for event planners who are bringing groups to Europe, and destination management companies and convention and visitors bureaus across Europe, who are trying to stand out. Food is huge. Like you said at the very beginning, we all have to eat, right? We all eat, and it's something that we can share. But how can they use the concept of what you have, to not necessarily put people on tours, but how can they incorporate that sense of community, to help their attendees build better connections at events?
Well, we do work with a lot of kind of MICE, which is
Hmm.
meetings, incentives, corporate events.
Yep.
And and it is a great activity. I mean, it's different if
Right.
we're planning a tour for, as we've been discussing this whole time, 8 to 12 people is different than for 60 people. I
Right.
mean, so we take a different approach, but at the end of the day, that still is a way to kind of gain access to the local food
Hmm.
culture, to try some of the iconic dishes and learn about them, and really kind of hit most of the points that we've already
Hmm.
discussed. I mean, independent of that, I know a lot of places will, a lot of event planners might go to like a farmhouse, and, maybe you're eating in a traditional setting and it's being prepared by a family. Um, and so there are different kinds of food experiences, whether it's a food tour or something like that, that I think still will give you, a sense of kind of the local cuisine, and maybe a smaller, but still a sense of the local food culture as well, as opposed to just going to, kind of any random restaurant to eat, but really being kind of selective
Yeah.
and conscious and intentional around what trying to kind of provide something that truly does have a sense of place
Right.
and has a kind of an educational component.
No, I love that. And I just realized I didn't plug my computer in um before we started, so before I run out of power. Um but no, I love that. And we have to, instead of doing it just in a ballroom or whatever. And I think being in Europe warrants a lot more experiences in that food culture wise than maybe, having a large contingency of people. And how do we can do dine arounds, et cetera, things like that. But it lends itself to one smaller events, versus, going to the Las Vegas Convention Center, or any convention center, I should say, right? So it does, eating in Europe warrants the opportunity for smaller, more intimate events. I love what you're doing, and I am coming to Italy, and we're gonna wrap this up here with 5 rapid fire questions, if that's good with you.
Amazing. Of course.
Okay, what's
Let's
your
do it.
favorite food city in Europe and why?
Favorite food city, Florence. I love the diversity. If you want Florentine steak, some of the best panini or sandwiches, one of my favorite street foods, Lampredotto, which is kind of like tripe. You got to try it. Some incredible pastries. So yeah, Florence, coffee, everything. They have the full gamut.
Okay, I love Florence myself. What makes the perfect stop on a food tour?
To me, it combines three things. So the food itself, the story of the place and the food, and then engagement with the local shop owner, market stall owner, restaurant owner. So those three things: the story, the human connection, and of course, the food that you're eating.
That's awesome. Okay, first bite that made you fall in love with food.
Oh my I don't know. I love my mom's baked ziti, so let's
Okay.
say
All
that.
right. Awesome. Um, w- uh, I know I had another question for you. Where to go? But one food tradition you'd protect from disappearing forever.
Oh man. One food tradition. I would say I'll stay with, I mean, coffee, like in Rome,
Mm-hmm.
the morning coffee bar experience. People going in, standing at the bar, ordering their cappuccino or cafe macchiato,
Uh-huh.
and it's so integrated into Italian culture. I mean, you can go in any neighborhood, really in any Italian city, and it's packed, and that's kind of how people are starting their day before they go to work. And I hope I come back in 30 years if I leave Rome and that's still as it is and as it's been for such a long time.
No, I love that. Okay, and the final question. Finish the sentence. Every meal should
Be memorable.
Okay, that works.
Yeah, if every one of your meals is memorable, I think you're doing pretty good.
Yeah.
You know, that would be a great way to live life.
No, I agree. I appreciate it. Well, I've put your Eating Europe handle on the bottom of the screen here. Eating Europe on all social, right? And
Yes,
then
at
the
Eating Europe.
website is eatingeurope.com.
That's right.
Okay. Well, Kenny, I so appreciate you spending time with me today. And I look forward to coming to Europe and taking one of your tours.
We would love to have you. You can be our guest anytime. This was a total pleasure. Thank you, Tracy.
You're welcome. Well, everybody stay safe and eat well until next week, and go eat across Europe at eatingeurope.com. Thanks for listening to the Eating at a Meeting podcast, where every meal matters. I'm Tracy Stuckrath, your food and beverage inclusion expert. Call me and let's get started right now on creating safe and inclusive food and beverage experiences for your customers, your employees, and your communities. Share the podcast with your friends and colleagues at our Eating at a Meeting Facebook page and on all podcast platforms. To learn more about me and receive valuable information, go to tracystuckrath.com. And if you'd like more information on how to feed engagement, nourish inclusion, and bolster your bottom line, then visit eatingatameeting.com.